May we all say amen.
Amen.
What a joy it is to be alive. You may be seated in the presence of the Lord. I greet you this morning in Jesus' joy as we come to celebrate the cosmic Christ of Calvary. I thank God so much for your pastor. Some of the greatest honors I have ever been paid in my entire ministerial career have been done by your pastor. To be able to invite him to come and to have him accept the invitation. And then as we rode through the streets of Gainesville, he invited me to come and to share with this great church. The invitation alone was enough. But then to have the opportunity to come and to share in this setting is certainly one of the greatest joys of my ministerial career. Give your fine, world-shaking pastor a hand. I want to call your attention to the gospel as recorded by St. John, John's Gospel, the 2nd chapter. And I want to read verse 9 down through verse number 11. The gospel as recorded by St. John, the 2nd chapter, verse 9 down through verse number 11. And I would that you would stand with us as we honor the reading of the Lord's word. The gospel as recorded by St. John, chapter 2, verse 9 down through verse 11. If you have it, you ought to shout amen. Let's read these verses together. When the ruler of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and knew not whence it was, but the servants which drew the water knew, the governor of the feast called the bridegroom, and saith unto him, Every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine, and when men have well drunk, then that which is worse. But thou hast kept the good wine until now. This beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee, and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him. Why don't you turn to your neighbor and say to them, Neighbor, he can turn water into wine. Amen. That's what I want to talk about this morning, from water to wine. In an incredibly small community, a community so small until it only had one preacher, one doctor, one sheriff's deputy. An occasion is recalled when that one preacher was driving through town rather erratically. He was then pulled over by the single sheriff's deputy who occupied that same town. The officer peered into the window and said to Reverend, Reverend, you're driving mighty strange. Is everything all right? And with glazed eyes and slurred speech, the preacher responded to him, everything's fine. It is then that with his keen sense of vision, the officer peered deeper into the crevices of the automobile and saw right there on the seat beside the preacher a bottle wrapped up in a paper bag. He then says to the preacher, he says, now listen, you and I have known each other for a long time. You can be straight with me. Have you been drinking, Reverend? And again, with glazed eyes and slurred speech, he says, absolutely not. He said, well, if you haven't been drinking, you won't mind me coming around to the passenger side and seeing what you got in that bottle. He said, by all means, be my guest. He goes around, reaches in, pulls the neck of the bottle to expose it, pulls it up to his nose to smell it, and he said, Reverend, you've been lying to me. There's wine in that bottle. He said, there's not wine in that bottle. That's water in that bottle. He said, Reverend, you're lying to me. It's wine in the bottle. He said, really? Jesus done did it again. As the curtain rises on the scenery of this text in John's Gospel, chapter 2, John records the first in a series of miracles that are recorded in this particular gospel. There are some 7 miracles that Jesus performs that are contained here in John's Gospel, chapter 7. This miracle of taking plain old water and turning it into wine is not only the first of the 7 miracles recorded in the Gospel of John, it is actually the first miracle that Jesus himself ever performed. What is it, ladies and gentlemen, that is contained in the verses of this text that are pregnant for discussion amongst the saints? What is the central theme that is driven home within the verses contained in this single passage? It is this, that the God of heaven is supernaturally at work through the circumstances in all of our lives to edify us, to magnify him, and to testify to the world that is around us. He works, first of all, to edify us. That is, he takes the stuff that we go through, whether we like it or not, and he uses it to make us better. He uses it to build us up and to make us stronger in him. If he's not working through circumstances to edify us, he'll work through circumstances to magnify his own self, so that the world around us and the world that he gives leadership to can recognize that he is God, and beside him there is none other. And when he's not working to edify us and to magnify himself, he's working to testify to the world that is around us. That is, the Lord uses our circumstances to say to a sinful and a dying world that he's able to do all things but fail. Truth of the matter is, you might love the fact that he works through circumstances to testify to the world around us, but you don't like it. Because some of the stuff that he will let happen to you doesn't feel good all the time. He will let you go through trouble for 38 years so that somebody else can come along and see your deliverance and know that the problem that they are either in or the problem they are going into, that he's able to bring them out of it. So you love the fact that he works that way, you just don't like it that much. Which draws us now to the language of this text in John's Gospel, chapter 2. As the curtain rises, we find ourselves in a most unique setting. It is a wedding celebration, a particular wedding, the wedding at Cana of Galilee. Several elements contained in this text that I believe are worthy of our further examination. I want you to notice with me, first of all, the teasing at the wedding. You find it here in verse 1 down into the first clause of verse 3, the teasing at the wedding. The text declares, and the third day, which means it was 2 days after Jesus' baptism, there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage, and when they wanted wine. Now, wedding ceremonies in antiquity were not performed in the same fashion that they are in our society today. I've done some weddings in 15 minutes from start all the way to finish. But in antiquity, the wedding ceremony lasted 7 straight days. It was the bridegroom's responsibility to see to it that all of the necessary provisions for the wedding were already in place. Now, he did not perform this job or responsibility by himself. He hired a governor to oversee the administration. The governor called servants to work under him, but he also enlisted the support of his own family members to help him get the job done. Which is why most scholars believe that Mary was a part of the bridegroom's family. And the reason that she was there was not only in an invitational capacity, she was there to do some work herself. The problem was that because of either the size of the crowd or the amount of drinking that was going on, the wine ran out. It was not that it was the groom's intention to short the crowd on the wine. But whenever you got folks showing up to drink for 7 days, the possibility at least introduces itself that the wine might run out. And because of how long they were there and how much they were drinking, the bridegroom, according to the text, never knew that the wine had run out. But the servants received word that that the more they tried to find wine, they couldn't find any more wine. And they go to the family members to keep from causing an embarrassment to the bridegroom. And Mary gets word that we're out of wine. Which means, ladies and gentlemen, that sometimes your best laid plans fall short. That your greatest desire to do the right thing and to get stuff to come out the way you want it to come out. Even when you try to do the right thing, sometimes stuff goes wrong on you. What do you do when your best laid plans fall short? I tell you what, you had better hope. You better hope Jesus is somewhere close by. I don't know how long you've been living, but life will teach you that some of the stuff you thought was going to happen don't always work out the way that you had it planned. You better make certain that Jesus is somewhere around. And as the curtain rises then on the scenery of the text, the servants have come, the wine has run out, and it is then that we move from the teasing at the wedding to the testing at the wedding. You find it there in the remaining clauses of the third verse after the text says, and when they wanted or lacked wine, it then says, the mother of Jesus saith unto him, they have no wine. There is a testing, ladies and gentlemen, that goes on at this wedding. It is not a testing that is single in its direction. It is not a monologue testing, it's a dialogue testing. Mary decides, even with the best of intentions, as we'll see in the text, to perform an examination on her own son. It is interesting that when you examine the life of Mary, whenever Jesus referred to her, he always called her woman. He was not trying to be disrespectful, but Mary gave birth to him, but he was still God manifested in human flesh, and either male or female, nobody's worthy of giving birth to God. So whenever he referred to her, he simply called her woman. She goes to Jesus and says to him, Jesus, the wine has run out. Notice with me, first of all, her motivation was presumptuous. You see it in verse 4. Jesus saith unto her, woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. The text literally reads, in a literal translation of the New Testament, woman, what have I to thee? What is interesting concerning the life of Mary that we often overlook is that Mary was neither angelic, neither was she omniscient. She didn't know everything at the same time. And the trouble is, in Luke's Gospel, chapter 1, verse 30 through verse 33, when Mary received greeting and salutation concerning Jesus, she was told that the one you carry will be the Savior of the whole world, and he will rule his people, Israel. Imagine what it was like for Mary to watch Jesus throughout all of his childhood, wondering when he's going to become what the angel said he would become. Trying to determine when is he going to live up to all of the projections and promises that have been made in his direction. And when she got to this point at the wedding of Cana of Galilee, she drew the conclusion that this was an opportunity for Jesus to do what he came to do in the first place. And she presumed that what he had come to do would begin to initiate itself at the wedding of Cana of Galilee. It was a presumptuous motivation. It was also a pure motivation, because when she got done talking, Jesus started talking. And he says to her, woman, what have I to do with thee? The next phrase you find in verse 5 is that his mother saith unto the servants, whatsoever he saith unto you, do it. I questioned myself when I read this text, and I tried to determine whether or not the King James Version had left some words out of the discussion. It did not seem practical for Jesus to shut Mary down, and the next thing Mary says is to the servants, whatever he tells you to do, go ahead and do it. So I sent Mary a pneumatological facsimile. I said, Mary, can you help me understand what went on here? And Mary responded, preacher, you should have saw the look on Jesus' face. When I said to him the wine had run out, preacher, he looked at me. It wasn't a rejected look. It was a look that said, if you can get beyond the distraction, if you can get beyond the momentary opposition, there's a blessing for you on the other side. And somebody in here has lived long enough to know that depending upon the kind of faith you have, it can determine the kind of blessing you can have. If you got bicycle faith, keep riding one. But if I got Mercedes-Benz faith, I'm going to drive one. If you got shack living faith, keep living in one. But if you got mansion faith, you can live in one. And Jesus said to Mary, in essence, can you stand the test? Are you willing to deal with the opposition that I bring your way? And the reason we know that it was not only presumptuous and pure, it was a profitable motivation. Because when the discussion was all over, Jesus started moving. This is not the first time that Jesus engaged someone in a test. In Matthew's Gospel, chapter 15, verse 21 through verse 28, a woman came to Jesus and said to him, my daughter is vexed with a foul spirit. And Jesus said to her, I am only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. The disciples said, Lord, send her away. She cries after us. Then Jesus responds after the woman comes and worships him. Jesus says, woman, don't you know it's not fit to take the children's bread and give it to the dogs? And the woman said, I understand this whole dog and bread business, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the children's table. In other words, sometimes God will test you depending upon where it is that he wants to take you in this life. There's a teasing at the wedding. There's a testing at the wedding. Is that all? No, there's at least a third element in the text. It is the tasting at the wedding. You find it there in verse 6 down through verse 10. And there was set there 6 water pots of stone, after the manner of the purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. 1 firkin was about 9 gallons. Jesus saith unto them, fill the water pots with water, and they filled them up to the brim. And he saith unto them, draw out now and bear unto the governor of the feast. And they bear it. When the ruler of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and knew not whence it was, but the servants which drew the water knew, the governor of the feast called the bridegroom and saith unto him, every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine, and when men have well drunk, then that which is worse. But thou hast kept the good wine until now. This beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and the disciples believed on him. The custom was in that day that whatever the good stuff was, you set that out first. And when everybody got done drinking and sipping on the good stuff, the rest of the stuff didn't matter that much. Some of you know what it's like to be walking through the mall. This in your BC days. I know you ain't had this problem no time recently. But in your BC days, your before Christ days, your before confirmation days, you walking through the mall or sitting in a restaurant, and somebody walk up to you looking real strange, kind of ugly in the face, and they say to you, remember me? And you look at them and look at the other folk who are with you and say, no, I don't remember you. They say, you ought to remember me. We were together the other night at the club. We partied all night long. They say, fact about it, when I showed up around 10, you wasn't that interested. But somewhere between 12 and 1, I started looking pretty good. Because the more of that stuff you got in you, the better your circumstances appear. And it is contained in the text that the wine that Jesus converted from water was better than the best wine that had been served. Can I ask you something? What insufficiency are you still holding on to when you serve a God who can turn water into wine? What is it that you're still going through you ain't got no business going through? What is it that you're still holding on to that the God you serve is big enough to handle, and yet you remain in the situation? One day a little boy went into the grocery store with his mother, and as they walked in, were on their way going out of the store owner said to the little boy, he said, son,
there's a barrel of candy there. Reach in there and get you some. The boy looked at the store owner, looked up at his mom, took both hands, shoved them into his pockets, and stood there. The store owner said, it's all right for you to have some. Little boy stood there with hands in his pocket, shaking his head. No. Store owner says, well, I'll give you some of the candy. Store owner reaches into the barrel, hands the little boy the candy. This goes on week after week after week. Finally, the mother says to the boy before they go into the store, listen, it's all right for you to have candy from the store owner. So whenever he offers you some, go ahead and accept some. Sure enough, they go into the store, do all of their grocery shopping. It's time for them to leave. Store owner says to the little boy, you want some candy? Little boy says, mm-hmm. He says, reach in there and get you some. Little boy says, mm-mm. Shoves both hands into his pockets. It is then the store owner says, well, I'll do what I've always done. Reaches into the barrel, gets some candy, gives it to the boy. He leaves skipping on his way. This time when they get outside of the store, the mother says to him, explain yourself. Didn't we have this conversation before you went in? Explain why you refused to get the candy on your own. He says, Mama, have you ever seen my hands? These little bitty things I got. Say if I put my little hands in there, I might get one or two pieces. But Mama, have you ever stopped to look at the store owner's hands? By the time he gets done reaching into the barrel, I've got more than enough and to spare. And God is trying to tell somebody in here this morning, get your hands out the barrel and let him put his hands in the barrel. Why? He can turn water. Wish I had a witness here. In the wine. There's a teasing at this wedding, a testing, a tasting. Let me close now with the testifying at the wedding. The text closes in verse 11 by saying, this beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed on him. Which means that the reason that Jesus performed miracles in this day and time, they were miracles of authentication, so that the world could know that he was who he said he was. John's Gospel, chapter 20, says that, verse 30 through verse 31, said many other miracles did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, but these are recorded, that we might believe on the name of the Son of God. And ladies and gentlemen, I believe that he's still in the business of performing miracles. But no longer is he in the business of performing miracles of authentication, which means he doesn't have to do a miracle to reveal who he is. That's what he got us for. Every time the world looks at us, they may not like our Bible. They may not like our Jesus. But one thing they can't deny is that while I might not be all I ought to be, I ain't what I used to be. In fact, about it, I'm closer to what I'm becoming than I am to what I used to be. So he no longer works miracles of authentication, but he is working miracles of inspiration. Which means that the miracles the Lord is now performing are not only miracles that testify of who he is, but the miracles he performs testifies to those who live in this life that not only is he good, but the Lord is also able. Do you hear what I'm saying? And not only is the Lord in the business of blessing his children, but the Lord is in the business of making a way out of no way. Do I have one witness? I'm glad today that every now and then I'm able to get out of myself and get in the text with the characters. And I ask myself sometime, who would I most like to be in John chapter 2? I thought about that thing and said maybe I'd like to be like Mary, because Mary was the one who received and passed her own test. Thought about it a little further and thought that maybe I would like to be like the disciples, because it was disciples who believed on the Lord after they saw the miracle. But the more I looked at that thing, I made up in my own mind, I want to be like the servants. And I can hear somebody saying, well, what is it, Reverend, that went on with the servants to make you want to be like them? What I discovered in the text is Jesus told the servants to take the water and put it in the barrels. As they filled up the barrel, Jesus then told the servants, dip into the water and take it to the governor. But what the Bible says, when they dipped in the water, it was still water. But when they got to the governor, the water had been made into wine. And the reason I like the servants is it reveals in my life that when God gives me instructions, wherever he sends, he also provides. And what it says to me is, if he gives me instructions over here and deliverance is over there, even if over here I don't know where deliverance is coming from, what it reveals to me is, and with this I bid you good morning, it reveals to me that my God can work while I'm still on the way. Do you hear what I'm saying? Matters not how dark the way might seem, matters not how high the mountain, how low the valley. We serve a God who can work on the way. Good morning, Salem. Thank you today for letting me stop by and talk with you this morning. But God told me to tell somebody, hold on. Do I have one witness? Hold on a little while longer. Might get dark sometime, might get lonely sometime, but hold on a little while longer. Why must I hold on? Because they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. Is that all you got, Reverend? Why should I hold on? I heard David saying, I have been young and now I'm old, never seen the righteous forsaken, nor receive begging bread. Is that all you got, Reverend? I got one more thing, one more reason you ought to hold on. David said in Psalm 30 verse 5, while weeping may, do I have one witness? Weeping may endure for a night, joy will. Do I have one witness? Joy will, joy will, joy will, joy will. Coming in the morning, your God can turn water into wine.
Lord, I know I've been changed. Oh, I know I've been changed. Lord, I know the Lord's house is open. No, I've been changed. Oh, the angels. word in here this morning. We heard a masterful word. Thank you, Dr. Thorpe, for a job well done.